Then let us check real quick. Channel live. Check. Perfect. Oh, that's wrong place. Mention. Live stream. There we go. Reading time. And then just because I like looking at the numbers go up, that's so cool. Don't like that name. Creepy username. The Doki us is there we go. Oh yeah. And so after we finish Sanguinius the Great Angel, we are going to go out of order and we are going to read Mercy of the Dragon, a Vulcan short story. And then I think I'm going to read Mark of Faith, an Adeptus Sororitas novel. I think I'll let you guys read Cain on your own. Might read Avenging Sun, I'm not sure. Hope you guys got your free 7 or 8 books from Black Library. I know I did. And I got Avenging Sun in German for some reason. I got it in German and English. How nice of them was that? Oh yeah. And I also looked up some good reading techniques, so I want to implement those techniques now. Chapter 11. How to compare the two of them. Difficult. Both were, to all practical purposes, so far above the run of things that they virtually transcended description. I spent a good time studying them once the fighting was over and we were back up at the fleet, and never got a perfect handle on it. You could tell they were brothers, despite the physical contrast. They spoke to one another like brothers, sharing looks, sharing observations, seeing the world through two pairs of eyes that betrayed a certain uniformity of outlook. They were two members of a very exclusive club, a tiny fraternity that existed right at the top of the imperial hierarchy and brooked no rivals. I'd often wondered what that did to their psyches. Even the most powerful of our mortal generals knew that, deep down, they were made of the same physical stuff as the troops they commanded and had come from the same kinds of places as those they ordered into war. For all the pathos of distance, that essential species similarity would assert itself, and you realize the figureheads by were so intimidated by were flesh and blood just like you, that they sweated when they were scared, that they had doubts and fears from childhood just as you did. I didn't think that applied to the Primarchs. They were even further removed from the. They were bespoke. They were on another planet. They were, and I mean this in no pejorative sense, just as non judgmental description, freaks. So I guess that they needed one another more than they needed any of us. Sundered by constant warfare and the unimaginable distances of the far-flung expeditionary fleets, they no doubt spent more time in their own heads than was healthy, surrounded only by lesser beings bringing queries and complaints and problems. Whenever that changed, whenever they had an opportunity to speak to one of their own kind, I imagine they leapt at the chance. I imagine they must have I imagine they must have been far closer than natural siblings, bound together by bonds tighter than any imposed by law or custom. You can laugh now. I look back on it myself, knowing what took place just months later, and wince. But then, it was all different, and there was no feigning how close the two of them were in that moment. Nothing at all to give the future away. They were relieved to be in one another's company when the moment came. They could share a smile and know it meant, and know that no other soul in the entire fleet would understand it just as they did. As I observed them, walking easily next to one another down the corridors of the vengeful spirit, their armor still splattered with the residue of Xenos blood, I had the distinct sense that some of what passed between them was transmitted subverbally, as I was told the tech priests communicated, though without the metallic add-ons. Something more like psychic sympathy, or maybe just familiarity. I knew they had spent many years together before Sanguinius was finally united with his own legion, with Horus the instructor and Sanguinius the pupil. The and their respective gene children remained tight. something that had been evident during the fighting I'd witnessed down on the surface. The combat styles were different, but only by degree. I thought the Luna Wolves were a little rougher, a little more willing to do whatever it took to kill their target rather than orchestrate an optimal close combat scenario. But I wouldn't have wanted to bet on which approach was more effective. These were two of the finest legions in the entire Imperium, right up there in terms of their victory record and propaganda value. Sanguinius might have been the image pinned over manufactoria assembly lines, but more lines of prose had been written about Horus than any other living person. After Olenor, his reputation had only been cemented further. The emperor was beloved by all, to be sure, but he was a long way away and unknowable, whereas Horus was on the vid reels, the hollow projectors, and he took the fight to the enemy in the void. I hadn't seen anything of him at the start of our deployment on this world. We had all been closeted away on the red tier for the most part, except for my infrequent excursions to the surface to observe the angels in action. It was only after that huge pitched battle on the ridge, later immortalized in the Imperial Archives as Encounter 140-42-3V, that I was able to accompany the Ninth Legion delegation over to the Vengeful Spirit. It had been a decisive victory, one that opened up the possibility of pushing deep into the Xenos nest zones. Several companies of Blood Angels transferred across, along with a few hundred support staff. I was only one of those, as was Videra. The mood was celebratory, and no doubt they wanted better records for posterity than the archives were likely to generate. As for myself, I was feeling better than I had for weeks. I'd begun to think that getting out of the stale air of the void ships was the key to combating my lethargy, but for some reason the vengeful spirit didn't have a negative effect on me. I was still buzzing from the experience of witnessing such intense combat up close. Maybe that was it. Enjoyed yourself down there, did you? Asked Widera as we marched along behind the Legion's warriors. She was as dismissive as ever, but I sensed a little jealousy in her tone. Widera could be a waspish creature, increasingly fragile, and I guess she'd been surprised at my willingness to risk myself for the cause. It was interesting, I said. You should have been there yourself. I have work to do. Talking of that, how's the book coming on? I had more material than I knew what to do with, and despite everything I continued to make progress towards a portrait of the Primarch. I wondered if she resented that and wanted me to fail again, or whether her desire to create something special was actually genuine. It'll be a masterpiece, I said. She rolled her eyes. Right. The procession reached its destination, a large audience chamber set deep inside the upper deck levels. I'd forgotten just how plain and unadorned a standard Imperial ship was, having spent so long on Ninth Legion variants. The vengeful spirit wasn't utilitarian, exactly, as there were plenty of icons and objects from their Chthonian domains, but the decoration wasn't quite so ubiquitous. I kept expecting to see frescoes and sculptures, and instead got bulkheads and bare metal access hatches. I quite liked the change. The vengeful spirit felt like a well ordered ship, a healthy one. The chamber filled up. Most of the participants were Astartes, and I'd started to become something close to comfortable around them. Baseline humans were there in numbers too, many from Chthоnia, Terra, or a dozen other worlds. We were a patchwork of different uniforms, different roles. No representatives of the Third Legion present in theater, the Emperor's children, had attended. I didn't know why, exactly, but it was no great surprise. No one liked them. Most of the conversation that followed was routine stuff, wrap ups of the various encounters, shared intelligence, the genesis of plans for more. I didn't follow all of it and didn't attempt to. I was more interested in the two of them, how they interacted. I wondered if Horus's new rank would dictate the way they spoke to one another, whether Sanguinius would defer to him. I didn't see much sign of it. They were equals. Horus listened to him, and Sanguinius listened to his brother. If anything, Horus paid more attention. I began to see the pair of them like a warlord and his counselor, the master of armies and his wise sage. Horus was the older of the two, at least if you dated their ages by when they were found. But Sanguinius felt older just then, and as if he'd been doing it all for longer. I don't think I properly thanked you yet, Sanguinius said, once the strategic situation had been fully appraised. For coming, for being the first strike of vengeance. Horus bowed. We were honor bound to respond, as were Fulgrim's sons, the captain, Tarvitz. He gave us quite He gave us great kindness when he first arrived. Yes, they're not all complete assholes. Sanguinius smiled. We could be here for months. There's millions of those things still alive. If that's how long it takes. But you have other things you need to be doing. Horace shrugged. What's more important? It gladdens my heart to do this together. It reminds me of the early years. Sanguinius, Sanguinius looked at him for a moment. How was your last compliance? 6319, same result as always. But something changed there. Horace looked up. Really? Maybe just a War Master's reserve. Sanguinius shrugged. But you seem different. Horace hesitated. I thought he might divulge something then. It looked as if he half wanted to. Not really. Never good to take on your own kind, is it? You'd think they'd learn to accept the inevitable. None of us would. If another empire suddenly announced itself and told us to accept a new master, Conrad might, well, he might do anything except crack a smile, the gloomy bastard. Some of Horace's troops chuckled at that. I saw then what was truly different about the two Primarchs. Horace was human in the broadest sense. His movements were natural, his good humor was evident. He looked like the kind you might take for a drink, share stories of old conquests or youthful exploits. It was foolish. Someone like him would never end up with someone like me in a social setting. But you could imagine it. Sanguinius, though, never lost that air of reserve. He was polite, he was soft spoken, he was intelligent. But he was somehow above it all, gazing out at the world from an interior state of unknowing dividends. So that was one reason why Horus had been made War Master. That mythical quality of being liked. Hard to overstate how important that was for buying loyalty, even in the hard-nosed atmosphere of the Imperial Army. A trooper would fight well enough for any general who didn't abuse them, but one like this, one who could make you feel you were valued and important and had his consideration, even for a second, that was priceless. Sanguinius naturally inspired absolute admiration in anyone who met him, but it was a rarefied kind of emotion, almost like religious devotion. You wanted to know that he existed somewhere out there, doing what needed to be done, but you didn't necessarily want to meet him or find yourself talking to him. You'd be tongue-tied, overwhelmed, unsure where to look. And I think the Primarch of the Blood Angels was aware of this. And I think that then, more than ever, this was because he was working hard all the time to maintain the persona that we expected him to have, whereas Horus was simply himself, naturally impressive, handsome without being beautiful, energetic without being manic. He had no extra work to do to achieve it, no immersion into the creative arts in order to supplement his tortured heritage, just the easy, slightly rakish charm of a natural leader, one who swam in political waters as easily as he dominated the battlefield. So I understood then why the emperor had done what he'd done, though it didn't make my doubts about my subject go away. But because another way of saying that Sanguinius was constantly maintaining an image was that he was pretending. And another way of saying that he was pretending was that he was lying. I didn't believe that. I still don't. You have to understand this. I have never, ever met anyone with as much evident integrity as Sanguinius. No one with as much bravery, nor as much expertise. So why couldn't he be himself? That was what nagged at me. Why couldn't he be like Horace? We were sent out too. We were sent out soon after that. The two brothers wished to confer in private, with only their trusted counselors present. My dear and I shuffled out of the chamber with the rest. I tried to catch up with her in the corridor, to ask her when she was due back on the red tier, but I was interrupted by another woman, one who was much younger, with very dark skin and two discreet scars indicating augmetic surgery at her temples. She seemed nervous, or maybe just tense. Sir Cautenia, she asked. Avijas, please, I said, smiling at her. Mercedes Ollerton, she said, reaching out a hand. Documentarist. I read your book. Sick. As ever. That twinge of embarrassment and pleasure. Look, it wasn't. I enjoyed it. It informed some of my approaches to this business. Going this way, I didn't know. I wasn't sure when I'd be summoned or what I'd be required to do next. I had notes to write up, recollections to set down, but there was no immediate urgency. I guess so. We walked down the corridor together. This Olaton had an appealing earnestness about her. They told me, yeah, no, that's stupid voice. They told me you'd be down to the surface to murder. I had to press for that. None of us could get clearance, she told me. Even Cinderman, he's the most senior. I was wondering, I could use some data if you have it. Sure, I said, as we reached the first bulkhead of many. What kind of thing? Vid feeds, audex lines, anything I can use to put a documentary together. I've been learning about how the Legion wages war, but without actually getting close, you can't get it right, you know? Agreed. Now I was wondering why the Blood Angels had let me go at all, when the Luna Wolves were clearly more protective of their remembrancers. I'll, I'll need to get back to the ship, extract the data cores, but you're welcome to what I've got. She looked up at me as a gesture that made her look strangely fragile. She must have she must have ah, she must have been a lot younger than me. What was it like, if you don't ask me asking? I chuckled. Overwhelming. Very impressive. Far too dangerous. I won't be doing it again. But worth it. To get a sense of just how Alton gave me a rueful smile. It still takes me aback sometimes, even after I've spoken to a dozen of them. You never quite get used to it, no matter how hard they try to put you at your ease. Very few of the Blood Angels had ever done that. I remembered Allion then, though, and resolved to find him again when I was back on the wrecked tier, assuming he wasn't still tied up in fighting. They're weapons, I said, even the most senior of them. The mistake is to treat them like people. The more I look into it, the more I think that's the way to approach this. I surprised myself by saying that. I had not had any such idea before that moment as soon as I said it, probably trying to impress this younger and more attractive colleague. I realized that it was probably true. A cynical view, she said, though it sounded like she didn't entirely disagree. Which makes me wonder what they make of us. Fragile, easily breakable annoyances, I guess. She laughed. Probably. We reached a closed doorway and she put a hand out to activate the release. I appreciate the help though. Anything I can do to pay you back? No, it'd be my genuine pleasure, I said, preparing to step through into the chamber beyond. Then I halted. Except, though, these legions fought together for a long time, didn't they? Years and years. Who's the oldest member of the Luna Wolves who might be prepared to speak to me? Olden smiled to herself as if I'd opened myself up to some long-running joke, though the sense of it escaped me. How much tolerance do you have? She asked. For stories, I mean. I blinked. Ooh, wait, no, wait. No, I think he. No. No, that's a space wolf. Never mind. Uh, I blinked. Was that something to worry about? Plenty, I said wearily. Then there's only one name that springs to mind, she said, amused. And trust me, he'd be delighted to talk. Yeah! Chapter 12. Yakting Cruise. I'll never forget the name, just because it was a bizarre one, most unlike the other Chthonian names that dominated the Legion, but because of the long hours I spent in his company. He could talk. Throne of Terror. He could talk. Perhaps it was his greatest weapon. Perhaps, if his blade and bolter ever failed, he'd be able to bore his enemies to death. As it will. But that's unfair. He wasn't boring. On the contrary, much of what he told me was riveting, candid in a way that no other space marine had ever been. Remembrancer gold. It was just that there was so much of it, and it all spilled out in one go, as he was clearly very pleased to have someone listening. As I sat there, the recorders clicking and my face aching from having to nod and smile at key junctures, I couldn't help thinking about that. Some human weaknesses remain then in these ultimate warriors. They may not know fear, but they could be resentful of being sidelined or insecure about a rapidly changing galaxy that seemed to have less and less of a place for them. They could believe themselves to be counselors while being secretly perturbed about the sidelong glances or raised eyebrows that they caught sight of from time to time. They could wonder at and become frustrated about the fact they were not a member of the Mournerville Council when many younger warriors had been invited. Such were the internal politics of the 16th Legion, which were hardly things I could comment on. I wasn't with him to talk about that, despite the fact he was so keen to illuminate me, but to discover more about the Ninth Legion, especially from the period before they became icons of veneration for the Imperium. How do I do cruise? I remember. Oh, fuck. I remember him arriving. Cruz told me as we sat together in his private cell. It was a modest room with bare walls and a rough rock-crete floor. That's a hard word to say. 59 years ago, and it's like it was yesterday. We'd seen other Primarchs before. We'd served with them. None of them provoked the interest he did. We knew so little about his legions, see? They were kept away, kept out of sight. I thought he'd be a mutant, and he was, I suppose, but not like I'd feared. Maybe the radiation spared him, or maybe it didn't. The results look good either way. How much did you see of him? Not much, to start with. The War Master, not that he was called that then, mind, took him in tow. They talked together a lot, most of it private. The first few times I witnessed him, I thought he looked the part. Quiet mind. Not like that bruiser Russ, who I also met. I liked Russ. He's underrated, if you ask me, especially by those who. There was plenty of this. Digressions, unasked for opinions. I tried to filter the irrelevant stuff out. It was the eyes, Cruz said, musingly, rubbing at his goatee. You looked at them, and what looked back at you was older than it should have been. You know what I mean? Like he's already seeing what you're looking at right now. Like he's been there before. I thought that more than once. In combat, too, he fought like he knew where his enemy was going to strike. I mentioned that to Tarek along the way, and he agreed. It was eerie at first, but we got used to it after a while. I'm not saying he really knew mine, like he was some kind of librarian. More that he gave you that impression. Probably just because he was so good. There aren't many living souls in the galaxy who I give a chance to against my own Primarch. but he's one of them. It's frightening seeing how expertly he kills. It was. It really was. And he was old before his time, too, Cruz went on. I don't know how aging works with them, to be honest. I don't know if the order they were found tells you anything about their biological age. I guess it probably does, but even if he was younger than Lupercal, he never really acted like it. Though he looks youthful enough, he's curiously ageless, don't you think? Like he's been around forever. And it didn't take long for people to ask him for guidance, for counsel, even the War Master. At times, before an action, I look at the two of them and see the angel leaning over to say something to him privately, like an old sage cautioning against some rash move on the part of his warlord. I thought almost the exact same thing. He advised on your change of name, didn't he? I asked. So they tell me. Sons of Horus. Crew snorted. We wouldn't be altering the old names. There's been too much change anyway, and no good will come of it. Things move on. Cruz looked irritated. Do they? Do they really? He shook his head. The badges and the insignia change. The stuff underneath, not so much. Take the ninth, the Revenant Legion. They were. They were feared and they were hated. You mentioned their name and March's expressions darkened. I could tell you stories. Oh, I could tell you things. Please do. He leaned forward, lowered his voice, which was odd because no one else was remotely in earshot. The constant rumor was that their homophagia was faulty. You know, the organ that gives us the ability to ingest memories. We all have it. We devour the slain to discover their secrets. You knew this, I take it. Some of your kind are remarkably ignorant. I did know that. I had never found it palatable, though, and often wondered if it were really true. I couldn't imagine how the mechanism could possibly work on a scientific basis, at least. I nodded, trying to guess where this was all going. It's a rare ability, rarely used, said Cruz. Some legions are keener on it than others. Some legions are very keen on it indeed. They positively relish the chance to sink their teeth into the flesh of the saint to get their mouths bloody while it's still hot. Gives them a tactical advantage, they say. No doubt true, but maybe there's more. Maybe they have a hunger that they won't admit to. Maybe it's about appetite as much as necessity. I suddenly remembered the corpse on Lilac, the one drained gray, and had an uncomfortable feeling. They're professional soldiers. They are now, Cruz chuckled darkly. We fought with them for a long time. 10 years on and off. Our companies placed under parallel command. By the end of that, they were like you see them now. Polished blades, gilt-edged armor, all haughty nobility. At the start, it wasn't like that. He hadn't had a chance to work his spell on them, and they were a bunch of wretches, believe me. I almost refused to work with them. Some of the others felt the same. They brought some foul habits with them, and for all they looked the part, the sickness ran deep. They hated everything. They hated the enemy. They hated us. They hated themselves. It made them deadly, in a way, but impossible to fight alongside. I didn't like to hear any of this, but he changed it all, didn't he? From the very start, said Cruz, nodding. He was the only one to treat them with any respect, and they responded to that. I think they were ready for the change. They knew it needed to come, and he was the one to bring it. They cleaned themselves up. The reports of atrocities started to fall away. I don't mean to suggest that they stopped doing those things, just that they got more careful about it, or they weaned themselves off it a bit. This was more than I had bargained for. But the important thing, I pressed, was that the Primarch cured them. Whatever excesses they were subject to, they're over it now. Cruz gave me a cryptic smile. You're sure about that? He said. You're sure that such a deep sunk tendency can be rooted out so that it never emerges again? He shook his head. You're human, remember, sir. You're flesh and blood with minimal tampering. We're not. We're creations built for a purpose. Everything in us is dominated by the gene seed. It makes us who we are and governs our tempers and our inclinations and our loyalties. And what is the origin of the gene seed? The Primarch. We're just extensions of them, reflections of that original glory. I thought he was goading me on then. I thought he wanted me to get angry. It's not that simple, I said confidently. Oh, not that simple, I see. I didn't realize I was talking to an expert. He sat back, stretching out two massive arms, grinning at me. Of course, these things are complex, but you asked me the questions. You wanted me to, you wanted to burrow into the past. And so don't complain when someone gives you the answers. You've heard tales of the Revenant Legion, and you want to believe that Sanguinius came along and made them pure. That's what everyone wants to believe. And it's true. Of course he did. He did turned them around, and now they're loved rather than feared, and everyone suddenly wants to fight with them. Then his long, mournful face twisted into an expression that was hard to read. But don't believe that their old form had nothing to do with him, he said. The seed was always there. What they are now, he once was. And what they were then, he is now. Bum, bum, bum. That's the water. It was then that I began to sicken again. Maybe the euphoria of my dangerous trip to the surface had worn off, or maybe going back to the red tear brought it all on again. Whatever the reason, I began to feel the pain, the aches and the spasms. I traveled between the giant flagships on the lighter with Widera, and she noticed the change in me at once. You look bad, she said helpfully. I wondered if she'd become jealous. I guess that she'd not expected me to work so hard to get such access in such a short time. I'd spoken to the Primarch himself, to members of his trusted circle, to veteran warriors of the War Master's own legion. To all appearances, I was doing better than she could have imagined. In truth, I barely knew what I was doing. I had a whole collection of material now, some of it suggestive, much of it banal, some hard to interpret. The more I discovered, the less I felt I understood. I admired this legion so much. I'd seen twice now how powerful they were, how steeped in the finest acts of creation and destruction. They had risen from the very basis depths to become a brotherhood admired and trusted, even by the greatest of the primarchs. And yet the doubt never left me. The words unsaid, the oppressive air of secrecy, even their name seemed to promise a threat. Blood angels. I swallowed down my nausea and tried to remember exactly when I'd had more than an hour or so of sleep. Working too hard, I said. How about you? She reached for her projector again and showed me what she'd been working on. It was another battlefield depiction, this time showing the Primarch and War Master jointly taking on mega arachnids. I liked this one better. She had an uncanny talent for conveying the alien monsters just as they had been. Both Sanguinius and Horus were appropriately heroic, and on this occasion I couldn't find any fault with the rendering. That was just how it had been, the two of them fighting back to back amid the seething hordes, holding back to the tides of Xenos and presiding over their slaughter. Sanguinius's wings were extended, rising high into the fiery night, though in reality he kept them furled. Otherwise, though, it was excellent, and brought back everything I felt at the time: the terror, the exhilaration, the pride. Very good, I said, without any intended irony. That'll inspire them on the production lines. Why, they're snapped the production off. I'm worried about you, she said, looking carefully at me. You took all the anti-rat treatments on ball, didn't you? All of it. I don't think this is something you might have got to you. You should see a member of the Legion staff. By then, I was increasingly sure that this wasn't the source of my malaise, but I merely nodded so that she wouldn't press it. We neared the red tier. The slow docking cycle gave me plenty of time to admire its vertiginous flanks as the flagship loomed closer, the gunwales glistening with gold leaf, the long crimson panels of armor decorated with cherubs and winged tears. My first glimpse of it had overwhelmed me. This one only underlined my nausea. I'd become, to be honest, fed up with all the finery. It no longer impressed me. It oppressed me. Like an over-scented garden, with the roses past their best and now beginning to mold. The riot of color felt suffocating, and as the great docking bay door slid out of the gloom, I could barely summon the energy to watch. You still enjoy your work? I said to Idera, more to take my mind off those thoughts than out of genuine interest. I love it, she said fervently. No honor could be greater. I can't fight, but I can do this. And you remain as committed to them as you ever were. She smiled. Look around you. This is the pinnacle of our civilization, the very best of it. We come out of the long years of destruction and decay and build this. I've seen things in the shadows of their ships that would be priceless anywhere else, but they stay hidden, locked away, because they only do it for themselves. You might think that's selfish. She rolled her eyes. I know you're trying to find every fault you can, every little chink in their armor. No one could meet the standards you set. They're killers. They have to be. And yet you can't get past it. I'm not looking for faults. You're turning over every stone. I hoped this assignment might have cured you of that. Remember before, your name was worth nothing. You were over. You have a chance to make amends now. And all I hear from you is ways to avoid the remedy. It's got to be the truth. Then write the truth. Write how they fight without fear, without hesitation. Write how they conquer worlds so that the species can survive at huge cost. Write how he takes on the horrors of the void so that you and I don't have to. He's magnificent. He's a paragon. I have done. I've done all that. She drew closer to me, peering at me like I was some strange and frustrating specimen. Then what's your problem? Why exactly can't you just celebrate him for what he is? Is it, I don't know, mental stress? Is that the problem? I didn't know either. I couldn't articulate it. It was more of a sensation, a dread that grew every time I was immersed in that vast ship. The hangar entrance closed over us, replacing the darkness with dull red glow from the guide lumens. It felt like being swallowed alive, sucked down into the maw of some colossal and ravening beast. There could be no doubt about it now. The ship was the ship itself was the source of it. Maybe any of their ships would have had the same effect. Was it a smell? A pheromone that somehow got to me? Was I allergic to something on board? Someone? The lighter connected with its docking clamps, and the structure sent out a resounding boom. Soon the whole lumens would come on, and hatches would slide open. The Legion serfs would take us out. I just looked at Widera's face, seeing the disappointment in it, the uncomprehending irritation. Well, we won't be here forever, Widera said, tiring of waiting for an answer. Already there's talk of moving to Kavos Belt, so you need to produce something to give them soon. She got up, and I heard the bustle of serfs coming to get us. You have a great title, she said. Write something worthy of it. And that is where we will stop.